أهلا وسهلا بكم أعزائي المشاهدين بهذه الحلقة الجديدة من برنامج عراقيون، برنامج الجالية العراقية في مدينة تورنتو الكندية. Welcome to this new episode of Iraqioon TV program. نقدم لكم الآن هذا التقرير اللي صورناه للمعرض المقام حاليا في متحف أونتاريو الملكي عن آثار العراق، وتستمعون لمعلومات قدمهن مشكورا دكتور كليمنز.
This program is sponsored by
Real Estate Agent خالد مرزا والحائز على الجائزة الماسية لأعلى مبيعات في عموم كندا لعام 2012.
Welcome to the Royal Ontario Museum, or perhaps I should say أهلا وسهلا في المتحف الآثار الملكية في Ontario. I'm very welcome to welcome you here today, since we're in the blockbuster exhibit, Mesopotamia, Inventing Our World. Or should I say, Ancient Iraq, Inventing Our World. We're fortunate to have this exhibit here of about 200 artifacts from the world of ancient Iraq, largely from the British Museum, but also from some other museums in North America, including our own pristine collection. Today, I hope to give you a tour of this wonderful exhibit, which is in town until January 5th, 2014, and show you some of the highlights. And I will try to explain to you why this ancient culture with these wonderful artifacts still matters so much to us today, and why it should matter to you in particular. Ancient Mesopotamia was home to many cultures, and one of the most famous ones that is associated with many of the great achievements of this world is Sumer. This is the home of many of the early cities. This is where the first empires came about, and this is where writing was invented. What we have here behind me is one of the most famous pieces in North America that comes from ancient Iraq. It's a little figure that is called the ram caught in a thicket, which of course is a reference to the biblical story that has nothing to do with the actual artifact. It's a little rearing goat made out of gold, lapis lazuli, shell, copper, silver. It was probably the support for a tray table or something like that. We don't quite know what it was, but it is one of the most delicately carved, intrinsically made pieces. It comes from a place called Ur, the famous Ur from the Bible and the Quran, where Abraham is supposed to have come from, and it dates to about 2400 BC. It was found in a compound that is called the Royal Cemetery, of which many of the artifacts that you see behind me, all the way around me, come from. This is showing you the wealth and the technological achievement and the artistry of ancient Sumer, a world that dates back 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. We're here in the exhibit of the Royal Cemetery of Ur, one of the most spectacular finds of the 20th century that was made in Iraq. And many of its artifacts are at the British Museum. They're also at the University Museum in Philadelphia. We have some of them here as well from this second museum. And many of them are in the Iraq Museum. Now, this is a burial place where many of Mesopotamia's early kings were buried in a time between about 2600 and 2400 BC. And what you see is an amazing amount of glittering gold, of carnelian, lapis lazuli. It's very impressive, yet it's telling a story. Behind me is a golden cup, and it has a funnel. It is actually a beer drinking cup. Beer in ancient Iraq was consumed in copious amounts, but beer could not be stopped from fermenting. So you had to drink beer from a straw. Yes, from a straw. This was basically the royal beer drinking cup, or so we are made to believe. The king would not drink from a common straw, of course. The cup is completely dysfunctional. It is a placeholder. It's a theatrical piece for a burial, nothing else. This is the wealth we're talking about. And as we look around, we see other pieces that tell us exactly the same story. You see beautiful headdresses made out of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, carnelian, that are way too heavy, way too cumbersome to wear. It is quite possible that they represent something that was natural. You see that they're made out of leaves, that they represent leaves, green leaves or flowers, and this is what the queen might in fact have worn. But for a burial, you couldn't just put flowers on her. You had to decorate her with gold for eternity. In a very intriguing way, what we see here is an eternal household of the great kings of ancient Sumer, 5,000 to 4,000 years before our time. Ancient Mesopotamia had many famous, powerful, and sometimes really arrogant-looking rulers. Behind me, you see a very famous piece. Actually, we have to be honest, it is a replica. The original of this wonderful copperhead is in Baghdad. It is hopefully still in the National Bank, in a bank vault, where it was safeguarded in 2003 when the Iraq Museum had been looted. This probably gives me a pause right now to refer to the Iraq Museum, to talk a little bit about the artifacts that were stolen from there and the fate of the current collection of the Iraq Museum. Most pieces that you see here were excavated in the 1920s and 1930s, and they were exported with permission of the Iraqi government to the British Museum or to other museums in North America. The greatest repository of the world of Iraqi artifacts of ancient Mesopotamia, however, is the Iraq Museum. And as many of you will know, the sad fate of the Iraq Museum 10 years ago, that it was looted after the fall of Baghdad following the Iraq 2003 war. Fortunately, the museum is being reconstituted, and the losses were not as terrible as we all had thought. They're bad enough, and a permanent reminder that these artifacts, cultural heritage, is not immune to warfare, and it's something that we really need to keep in mind. Now we've seen pictures of mighty, arrogant-looking Mesopotamian rulers. In fact, they were kings of the world. Some of them were even deified in their lifetime. But we have a few other pictures of more ingoing, more translucent, more enlightened rulers of ancient Mesopotamia. And here's, behind me, is one of the most famous ones, a ruler, a governor from a city called Lagash, down in the south, in the area of Nasiriyah. We have lots of artifacts, and we have even more writing of this very enlightened governor named Gudea, who lived around 2100, 2150 BC. And this is a particularly beautiful piece that we have here, and I am very happy that we were able to bring it to Toronto from our neighboring city of Detroit, where it is normally exhibited at the Art Museum, the Detroit Institute of Art. It's a beautiful green stone, and if you walk around it and look at it, it feels as if Gudea is speaking to you. He looks very natural, he seems to be moving, he seems to be walking. One of the most beautiful pieces of Sumerian art in North America, some 4,100 years ago. There were times when ancient Iraq ruled the world. Most of you know about the Abbasid period, when the world was basically ruled from Baghdad. But the same happened about 1,000 years earlier, when the empire of ancient Assyria controlled a world, an empire that started in the western part of Iran and extended all the way down to Egypt. This empire was ruled from mighty cities, from big imperial capitals. Many of the names still sound familiar today. Nimrud and especially Nineveh, which is located in the city of modern-day Mosul. The Assyrian kings built mighty palaces that were decorated elaborately with battle scenes, with lion hunts, and with religious scenes. And what you see behind me right now is the biggest artifact that we have on display here right now at the Royal Ontario Museum. It comes from Nineveh. It was brought in from the British Museum. What you see here is a mighty battle scene against an army that came from a state called Elam, which is in western Iran nowadays. What you see is a battle that happened at the border between the two states around 653 BC. As you can imagine, the battle goes bad for the enemy. Needless to say, otherwise, presumably, the Assyrians wouldn't have shown it. You see battles, you see killings. Well, you see a lot of things that are all too familiar, unfortunately, and it actually shows us, it's probably a sober reminder that warfare, unfortunately, has a long story. What it shows us, on the other hand, is the artistic achievement of ancient Assyria, a quality of artwork that does not find its equal for another 1,000 years again. We've heard a lot about the cruelty of the Assyrians and bloodshed and war, but there's a finer side to this culture as well, a much finer side. In addition to the magnificent artwork, the reliefs that they've left us, which are of superb quality, we also have one of the greatest literary testimonies of the antique world from the Assyrian Empire, the library of King Ashurbanipal, which was found at Nineveh. Ashurbanipal was the last famous king of the Assyrian Empire. And he was a literate man, and he collected texts from all over his empire, most of them from this southern rival of Babylonia. Most of the texts, actually, all 30,000 that are now in the British Museum, are from Babylonia. Behind me is one of the most famous pieces that was found in this library, the so-called Gilgamesh epic, one of the tablets of the Gilgamesh epic. This is the story of a famous king of the city of Uruk in southern Mesopotamia. He would be from a time around 3000 BC, and he's one of those eponymous heroes that the Babylonians and Assyrians could never grow tired of telling stories about. Gilgamesh is a young man, he's arrogant, he's a king, he's even half divine, but he cannot get enough. He gets punished, he loses his friend, his best friend, and for a major part of the myth, we see him trying to find eternal life. He realizes that he himself is immortal. He crosses the sea of death and eventually finds eternal life after talking to the one survivor of the flood. Yes, the flood, which is well recorded in Babylonian literature. It all fails in the end. Gilgamesh is immortal after all, but he's also not immortal because today we still read his story. We can still read it. The Library of Ashurbanipal is another gentle reminder that writing on clay, as was done in ancient Babylonia, is not such a bad idea. The library burned down. But what happens to clay when it burns down, when it gets exposed to fire? It just gets harder. This is why 2, 3, 4,000 years after the end of these empires, we still read the stories of its famous kings. The crowning end of this exhibit is the story of Babylon, where you can learn a lot about the story of the site, the city of Babylon. You can hear about Hammurabi, the first famous king of Babylon who wrote the first law code, or actually he's the name giver of the first law code. And you're learning a lot about this famous city that shows up in the Bible and actually has a very bad reputation there. And we've done our best to adjust that a little bit. Babylon, around 600 BC, is literally the largest city in the world. It's about 8 to 9 square kilometers. It is surrounded by a magnificent shining wall, tiled in blue tiles. And it has magnificent temples and streets that are lined with beautiful lions, monsters, and bull figures, such as the one behind me. The one behind me, in fact, is from the palace of Babylon's most famous king. This is King Nebuchadnezzar. It was found right next to his throne room. And through some sheer luck, some very interesting story, this piece ended up here at the Royal Ontario Museum and is actually one of our crown jewels here in our own collection. And we're very happy to show it here in the Mesopotamia exhibit as one of the two highlights at the very end. This is not the end of Mesopotamia. This is not the end of the story. Babylon falls, it gets conquered, but the world of Mesopotamia lives on. It survives the Greek, the Roman period, even during the Islamic period, in fact, to present day, the story of Babylon, of its fate and its fame, never got lost. And fortunately, there are so many artifacts in this exhibit, as well as on other sites, as well as at the site of Babylon, which is still in existence today in Iraq, they can continue to tell the story of this magnificent city.
أعزائي المشاهدين، نتمنى أن يكون هذا التقرير عن معرض الآثار العراقية في متحف أونتاريو عجبكم، وأيضا نتمنى على العوائل العراقية والعربية المقيمين في تورنتو زيارة هذا المتحف، حتى نشجع إدارة المتحف على تركيز اهتمامها على الآثار العراقية والعربية. بالوقت المتبقي من برنامج عراقيون لهذا اليوم راح نستمع لمقطع موسيقي من الفولكلور العراقي.
هذا البرنامج قدم لكم برعاية
وكيلكم العقاري خالد مرزا لخدمات بيع وشراء وتأجير العقارات السكنية والتجارية، ويمكنكم أن توصلون إلي عن طريق الإيميل ورقم التليفون اللي يظهر على الشاشة.